Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, January the 5th, 2026. So we had the full moon over the weekend, and its results have perhaps been impressive, certainly in terms of Venezuela. And that full moon did hit the 1811 horoscope of Venezuela, and in quite a spectacular way. And in this video I want to just have a look at this full moon again, and also consider what is going on right now, because it's not just about that full moon. We are thinking about Neptune. I am thinking quite a lot about Neptune. Neptune is a planet that's often associated with oil, and one of the reasons that Trump intervened in Venezuela, perhaps the main reason, is because he wanted control over Venezuela's oil resources. And we also shouldn't forget that Neptune is getting quite close to Skeet, that rather unpleasant fixed star at the end of Pisces. I think Neptune is now only 10 arc minutes from Skeet, and then of course Neptune goes into Aries, and I think that's all part of it. So I don't necessarily have a specific thing I want to talk about. I mean, I've got a picture of Trump on the thumbnail. I mean, Trump is very much at the center of things. But the question is, what has he unleashed, and to what extent is Trump the face of the new order, the new world, which perhaps we are now entering into? But before I look at all that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, January the 5th, 2026. So here is the chart for today, set at noon New York time on Monday. So turning to this chart, the moon is right in the middle of Leo. So it is a moon in Leo day, and the moon is something of a singleton. I mean, it's a singleton because it's the sole representative of the positive elements, fire and air. I know Pluto's in an air sign, but in terms of the traditional planets, the moon does have a lot of work to do. It's the only planet in a fire sign. I mean, it's some fire, but it's somewhat weak, the moon in Libra, and its aspects, well, it doesn't really do very much. It's just unsupported. I mean, there are no sextiles or trines that the moon makes to other planets that might be in fire and air signs. It's not even making any. It's not making any squares. It's not any oppositions. No. I mean, it's not doing much. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that the moon is void. Yeah, the moon is void, of course. It's not going anywhere, and it's void, of course, quite early on in the sign. So with void, you'd always expect there to be something, but it's 16, middle of Leo, it's already void, and we might feel that. It might feel that there is not a great deal going on a personal level. Of course, we know in practice there is a huge amount going on, and the moon is function, its process in a chart. But there are other things to consider. Venus is getting very close to the sun. We do have actually a Venus-Sun-Mars conjunction. So here it is. It is really close, and this Venus-Sun-Mars conjunction, does it override the void moon? I think perhaps on a personal level, no. There might be things going on. There might be big events, but do they necessarily affect us directly? Are we as individuals able to harness it? Well, probably not. So maybe it's not actually a particularly active day. I mean, in terms of actual exact aspects today, there aren't any unless you count a quintile between Venus and Saturn. I mean, Venus is 72 degrees from Saturn, and that might be the style we are trying to create. So Venus quintile Saturn might be a restrained style. We're not trying to put out too much. We're trying to be somewhat reserved. That's what we are consciously trying to achieve. And maybe we'll be able to do it if we are persistent. And we just might feel that is the best approach. But we can't take away from the fact, as I was just saying, that Sun, Venus, and Mars are really close to one another. And this Sun-Mars conjunction becomes exact. We've been feeling it already. We saw it, with the fire in Switzerland, and perhaps the drama in Venezuela. And it's when you think about the Sun Mars, you think perhaps about real heat. And of course there have been attacks in the new year in Ukraine. I think someone said they might have used phosphorus. Ukrainians using it against civilian targets. I mean, that's what one expects in that part of the world, unfortunately. So yeah, there is a real Sun Mars feel there to what's going on, and maybe the Sun Mars is not quite finished. It's not quite finished. We've got the Sun Mars conjunction is happening, later in the week. So again, with Sun Mars, we do think about fire, things burning. Yeah. Perhaps we shouldn't think that it's all about what happened on not New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and in Switzerland, but that was such a Sun Mars event. It really was. And so if you look at what was happening astrologically at the stroke of New Year, you had a Sun Mars conjunction on the IC. Almost wherever you place the new year. So if you set a chart for the exact moment that the 2025 became 2026, you see Sun Mars conjunction on the IC, and of course that really fitted this basement fire in Switzerland. But we need to still be careful of basement fires. We still need to be careful of things that could blow up. So it is a time to be really cautious about things that are flammable, things that are explosive. So, and it continues to be like that because that Sun-Mars conjunction is getting closer and closer. And, additionally, we've got Neptune moving towards a conjunction of Skeet. Neptune is 10 arc minutes from Skeet. So, Skeet is a fixed star which is unfortunate. It's connected with accidents, disasters, accidents connected with water. I'm not saying necessarily tsunamis, but we all have to be careful with water, because things can go wrong. And even if it's not water, it's just disasters. Disasters can happen. And so when we put together Neptune conjunct Skeet with Sun conjunct Mars, well, there could be trouble. And the week hasn't finished. So just because we've got a void moon today on Monday doesn't mean to say that everything is going to be easy. You can have a void moon and you can have terrible things happening. That's certainly true. So that's the picture for sort of New York at noon New York today, January the 5th, 2026. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, moon is still in Leo at noon. And again, the moon is not doing very much. The moon is separating from an opposition to Pluto, but I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between what's going on in Sydney, Australia, and what's going on in New York or Los Angeles, for that matter. And then there is the heliocentric view, and the heliocentric view is just telling us kind of, what we what we already know. So here it is. January the 5th, 2026 at noon, and the Earth is at 15 degrees Cancer. Remember, in a heliocentric chart, the Earth is always going to be opposite the Sun. So we've got the Sun. The Sun geocentrically is at 15 Capricorn. Heliocentrically, it's at 15 Cancer, and the Earth is making an opposition. Earth is making an opposition to Mars, and it's making an opposition to Venus. That's what we already know, because we know geocentrically that there is a Sun-Venus-Mars conjunction, and the heliocentric chart is just presenting that conjunction in a different way, and I think in quite a useful way. It reminds us that there is tension here, that things are starting to boil over, even though today the moon is void of course. And then you can see that the Earth is starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. In other words, the Sun is starting to make an opposition to Jupiter. It's the same aspect, but just looked at in a different way. So this opposition, Venus conjunct Mars, opposition Earth conjunct Jupiter, the pressure is building, and maybe this will start to boil over later in the week. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today, for the 12 signs, for Monday, January the 5th, 2026. Aries. Don't forget, it's the beginning of a new week. There are no holidays to worry about. There's no need to think about the past, and it's time to do whatever you have to do, and to really take advantage of the fact that there are now 4 planets in Capricorn, and there are perhaps no more excuses. And those planets will not stay in Capricorn forever. They're all going to move into Aquarius pretty soon, and so you might have a couple of weeks. I don't know what precisely it is. So Venus is the first. Venus is the first of those planets to move out of Capricorn into Aquarius. Might not seem like it, because Mars seems to be ahead of Sun and Venus, but Venus is the fastest mover. So Venus catches up with the Sun, catches up with the Moon, and then catches up with Mars, and then moves into Aquarius. So now, this full week ahead of you with 4 planets in Capricorn, then really, as I said, just make the most of it. So what is it that you want to achieve? Be ambitious, and really do whatever you can to make progress. Now, to begin with, Monday, you try your hardest, but it might be difficult to feel that you're actually getting anywhere. But don't worry about that. You shouldn't judge things by immediate results. If you keep moving, then slowly, surely, always having in mind what the end goal is, then I think that you're going to be able to make really good progress. Now, I'm not saying that you should take risks. The Sun is getting close to Mars, and so with Sun conjunct Mars, well, you could say that Mars is combust, and when you've got these 2 fiery planets, Sun and Mars, coming together, there is the question of how do you deal with it. It is an explosive combination, and certainly you shouldn't be doing things which could have explosive consequences. It's not, for example, a good time to be playing around with your chemistry set, or mixing dangerous chemicals, or playing with electricity, or watch out with fire. Because things could go wrong, and things could spread very quickly. So there is certainly a very negative side to this conjunction between the Sun and Mars, but somehow Sun Mars it doesn't necessarily feel in this sense right now to be necessarily that negative if you make the most of it, because it's quite a forceful combination, and maybe you can throw the full force of your personality into doing things, and you're not someone who's just going to just give in or accept someone else's authority or surrender. No, you want to keep moving, and just always sort of bear in mind your ambitions. And it's a day when there aren't any exact aspects. I mean, there is a quintile between Venus and Saturn. When I say exact aspects, I'm using the major aspects to traditional planets. I'm not counting Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in this count of exact aspects. So that might give you a certain amount of freedom as the week starts. The moon is in Leo. You can explore your own material. You can try things out. You can be creative, and there's possibly not so much pressure. But if there is any pressure, I think that it comes from you, Aries, because I think that it is a time to stand out. Even if you're not being recognized today, you still need to make the effort. So, Aries, I think that it is very much a new week. It's a new year, and I just think that you need to get on with it, but at the same time, just stay out of trouble. Especially, don't do anything dangerous, particularly that is physically dangerous. And things like fire and electricity should be treated with great caution. Taurus, not a lot going on today, at least in terms of exact aspects. But of course, maybe we shouldn't just be worried about exact aspects. I mean, the exact aspect we have is Venus quintile Saturn. And so Venus is 72 degrees away from the quintile with Saturn. And so that might mean that, Taurus, you feel you need to be somewhat restrained. I don't think that you're going to want to put your head above the parapet. You'd rather do things in your own way, and you might take the view that the less attention you get, the better. And you don't want to reveal too much about your plans and your ideas, and you might actually make a deliberate attempt to keep quiet about things, to keep things to yourself. And that might also be reflected in just the way you come over, maybe the way you dress, the way you talk. You just don't want to give too much away, and it requires some planning and some organization, but it feels right. So Taurus, don't allow yourself to be pressurized. I don't think you're going to want to put yourself in a position where you have to do what other people want or say, and if no one can see you, if no one knows where you are, then there isn't going to be any pressure, is it? You're not available to be pushed around. I'm not saying that you are going to be pushed around, but it is the right approach. And you shouldn't forget that Venus, your ruler, is not just making a quintile to Saturn. Okay, quintile to Saturn is the only aspect that's exact today, but Venus is really close to the Sun, really close to Mars. Over the next few days, Venus will make a conjunction to the Sun. It will make a conjunction to Mars. I think that these two aspects could be difficult, and you're already feeling that conjunction to the Sun. You've been feeling it for some time, and it is about perhaps outside forces trying to infringe your freedom of action, maybe. Or it could be that you can't fully understand what is happening. You're trying to make judgments. You're trying to reach conclusions. But it's really hard work. It could be that things going on in your home are clouding your judgment. It could be things from the past. Your memories might be strong. You're thinking about, maybe things that happened decades ago, but it is weighing in on you. And because of that, it just might be a time where you need to just recognize your own limitations. And if you reach a decision on the spur of a moment, there's a good chance it'll be the wrong decision. Instead you should keep your options open, really think about what is going on. And it's certainly not a time for commitment. And the Venus is also pretty close to Mars. So when you've got Venus-Mars conjunctions, one inevitably thinks about relationships and perhaps who has the power. And in any relationship right now, it's just possible that the other person does have the power. I mean, Mars is in Capricorn. It's exalted in Capricorn. And Venus is rather too close to Mars, rather too close to the Sun as well. And so, going back to what I was saying right at the beginning, it might well be a time when you need to keep a relatively low profile. If there's no one around, if there's no one telling you what to do, I mean, what's there to worry about? You have maximum freedom. But as soon as there's another person around, particularly another person who has a history of being assertive, then you might just find that you lose your way, because you feel that in spite of your inner self wanting to stand up to someone or to stand up for yourself and your own interests, when you're actually in a situation where there is another person around, then it may be difficult, and you may give something up or compromise which you didn't really want to do. So, Taurus, I would kind of suggest that you treat other people with care, and you need to think about their track record. If they've behaved in a particular way in the past, then they could easily behave in the same way in the future. And this also applies to members of your family. I mean, members of your family may have expectations of you, and it's difficult to refuse, but somehow you've got to hold firm, I think. Gemini, you are thinking about things. You might have things to say. You can talk as much as you like, but the question is, is anyone going to listen? Well, it's that kind of day. It's not a day, Gemini, where things are especially dramatic. I mean, the moon is void, of course. That means, the moon has made its last aspect. I don't even know if it made any aspects before leaving the sign. So, okay, the moon did make an opposition to Pluto, but that's in the past. And now the moon's basically going nowhere. Okay, you could say the moon is making a square to Uranus in the end, but in terms of deciding whether or not a planet is void, you don't count Uranus. At least I don't count Uranus, because Uranus is an outer planet. So, Gemini, a lot to say, a lot that you want to do, a lot that you want to communicate, and yeah, you have a lot of freedom. But the problem with having freedom is that there's no one around. I mean, that is freedom, isn't it? I mean, when there's no one to tell you what to do. No one getting in your way, but it all feels a bit empty. Sometimes you want to have a struggle, you want to be up against someone, because it just makes things more exciting, and any victories you have would then be more satisfying. But I don't think that you feel in the mood. I don't think anyone else is in the mood, and it's in its own way a day which does have a certain intensity. I mean, we do have Venus, the Sun, and Mars making a conjunction, I mean, that could be quite an explosive conjunction, even though it's in Capricorn. But the question is, does it really affect you? I think it might affect the way you feel. And Gemini, you kind of realize that things are serious at the moment, that things can't be trivialized. Geminis sometimes do like to trivialize things, but you know that would not be the right thing to do. And, instead, you just want to take the time to understand what is happening. And yeah, there's no pressure. Absolutely no pressure. So Gemini, what do you do with yourself today? Well, do try to challenge yourself. Try to challenge yourself intellectually. Try to do things which maybe in the past you'd run away from because they were too complicated. I think you have quite a strong ability at the moment to deal with things which are complicated, that you have perhaps run away from, but in the past you didn't necessarily want to know the truth. But maybe now is a time for discovering the truth in your own way, and it's not necessarily anything immediate. It takes place over time. Over time, you start to understand what's going on, and that requires some patience. And as far as what you're trying to communicate, if no one listens to you and nothing seems to be happening, it's important that you don't give up, that you don't despair. Instead, do just keep going, and always be prepared to do research, find out what's really happening, and that's probably the best way of managing today. I mean, I'd love to be sort of more upbeat, but it's that kind of day. At least on individual level, on an individual level, that there are some big things going on around you. I mean, there is this conjunction between Venus, the Sun, and Mars, and you also know that these things are serious. Now, that seriousness should probably not be underestimated. Geminis are very good at just moving on. You see something, you don't want to get too involved, so you just move on to something else. So perhaps what you should do is take what is serious in the world around you. Again, it's not necessarily about you, but it is something that's important for everyone, for society at large. So you can take that seriousness and really think about it and try to analyze it. I mean, it might not seem immediately relevant, but in the end it could be. I mean, we are all connected. We're all part of the collective, and what affects one person will affect another person in the end. And perhaps that's what it's all about. You looking at the beginnings of things, which to begin with seem irrelevant, but at the same time that sooner or later they will become relevant. They will become an important part of your life. So the sooner you understand what's going on, I think the better. Cancer. It's a day where I'm finding it difficult to be excited, and I'm not singling you out, Cancer. It's really for everyone. When I look at what's happening, astrologically today, and what the exact aspects are. I mean, we've got Venus quintile Saturn. Venus quintile Saturn, I think, is the only non-lunar aspect that is exact over the course of the day. I mean, you did have Moon opposition Pluto, but even in Australia and New Zealand, that would have been very, very early in the morning. If you're in the Americas, that Moon opposition Pluto is simply yesterday's news. And so, Cancer, you have to ask, what should you be doing? Well, what you should be doing, there's nothing that you should be doing at all. And maybe that's a great thing about this Monday. Even though there are some really quite heavy things going on in the background. We've got a conjunction between Sun, Venus, and Mars. and that conjunction is as good as exact. So that is a serious event, and it does make you think about the world, and not just the world, that is sort of random, abstract, far away. It could affect you in the end, that's true, but I don't think anything happens actually today. And with the moon moving through Leo, not doing very much, then Cancer, it might just be best if you just did what is necessary. With the moon moving through Leo, I mean, moon in Leo, well, from a Cancerian perspective, moon in Leo can be about money, how much money you have, thinking about money, and it's not that there's any financial pressure, but it could nonetheless be a good idea to do something related to money. Perhaps work out what's happening in your own quiet way, and again, not feeling that you absolutely have to do anything. It's not like an emergency, but if you can quietly address yourself to financial issues, that might be a good idea. Additionally, this Sun, Venus, Mars conjunction, which becomes exact over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the next few days, but we don't see any aspects today. Additionally, this conjunction, it is in your opposite sign of Capricorn, and that might well say something about other people and how they are maybe starting to behave. Some people have strong opinions, they have strong beliefs, they're not prepared to give anything away, and that might be becoming clearer. And so observe other people and ask yourself, what could they do next? You don't really want any surprises. And it's not necessarily that they're going to do anything today, but they might do something tomorrow or the day after. And also consider, what kind of pressure might another person be under? Because, it's quite possible that under it all, there is a lot of pressure building. So just because someone is cool and calm and relaxed doesn't necessarily mean that nothing is going on. And if you look at your chart, you put Cancer on the left, you see this build up on the other side of the chart, and the other side of the chart, okay, it could be about other people, but maybe we should need to see Cancer and Capricorn as a polarity. Always worth doing, rather than saying, oh, there are 12 signs, thinking about 6 polarities, and Cancer Capricorn is one of those polarities, and it's kind of lopsided. And those 4 planets in Capricorn might represent a part of yourself that you are least aware of. I think that in Jungian psychology, or astrologers using Jungian psychology, I think they sometimes like to say that the 7th house, the opposite sign, represents the shadow. Everything that we are, or a lot of what we are, but what we just simply don't recognize. Perhaps what we see in other people. So when we see other people's behavior and it perhaps irritates us, the reason we're irritated is because we're seeing ourselves, but we refuse to recognize it. So maybe when you look at other people and you look at what they're doing, you might think about yourself and what you might be projecting. It could be, for example, Cancer, if you see someone doing something you don't approve of, at some deeper level you really want to do it. Or maybe you aspire to particular qualities, and those qualities are being represented by those around you. And this is perhaps a cause for reflection, being honest about who you are, and also being honest about what you're missing. And there is something very dynamic about those 4 planets in Capricorn, and perhaps you are being encouraged to be extra dynamic. You don't want to be dynamic at some level. It's easier just to, be yourself, or, be yourself. Well, be part of yourself. Be the part that you find easiest, and the other parts of yourself which are more demanding, which are more dangerous, well, you can perhaps put them to one side, but maybe you can't. And one thing that we have had recently, just a couple of days ago, is Chiron going stationary direct. And I did talk about that. When was it? I think it was January the 2nd. So that would have been, was that Friday, last Friday? Yeah, I think last Friday, Chiron went stationary direct. And so Chiron is still at a standstill. And, Chiron is in Aries. The moon is starting to make a trine to Chiron. And Chiron going stationary direct, from your perspective, Cancer, might be about your need to be different, to be someone who just doesn't do what everyone else wants, is able to be radical, is able to cause shock and disturbance by the things you say, even by the things you do. And Cancer, that's not something you necessarily want. You want a quiet life, but you've got something to contribute. And maybe with Chiron going stationary direct, you're kind of aware that you have got something to contribute, but you don't necessarily want to contribute it because it's just too much effort. But maybe with the moon in Leo making this trine to Chiron, the moon is not really doing anything at the moment. So normally I wouldn't put too much emphasis on moon making a trine to Chiron, but today and into tomorrow, as this moon does make a trine to Chiron, it's an important aspect. And maybe you have a chance, Cancer, to be yourself, and it might require a certain amount of bravery, but you are expressing your fundamental individuality, and you shouldn't necessarily worry too much about what the response is going to be. That is the nature of individuality. If it wasn't individuality, well, what would be the point? You have to perhaps get people's attention. I mean, Chiron wants attention, particularly Chiron in Aries. And yeah, if you've got a different approach, a different view, maybe Cancer, it does need to be expressed. Leo, moon is still moving through your sign. And so, that's good. It means that you've got the moon's in a fire sign. You're feeling relatively comfortable in your own skin. You don't feel that anything is too troubling. Whatever you encounter is manageable. But the question is, Leo, where is it all going? And you might think, as you start the new week, that it doesn't seem to be going at all. You can see the potential. I mean, there's a lot of potential going on. A lot of heavy things are happening, and it just doesn't seem relevant. And so maybe, Leo, you need to think about all of this. And it's not about taking immediate action. I mean, part of you would like to act, do something dramatic, but is it going to be possible? I think it's going to be hard work, and you should not be looking for immediate and dramatic effects. I mean, I think if you are looking for that, then in the end you might be quite disappointed. On the other hand, with the moon in Leo, making no aspects except a trine to Chiron. A trine to Chiron may have some relevance, but with the moon making no aspects, you could argue that does give you a certain amount of freedom. So we might have heavy stuff going on, the Sun, Venus, Mars conjunction, which you certainly need to be thinking about. But maybe amongst this chaos, amongst this drama, you can really cut your own path without any interference, or without much interference. So maybe you're going to be able to get a lot further than you expected, but there'll be no resistance. And it can be annoying when there's no resistance. Because if there's no resistance, you have these sort of existential questions. What is the point? You need to have contact with the world, but that contact, might be missing. So just because you don't get any reaction doesn't necessarily mean that nothing is going on. And additionally, Leo, we have to think about the sun, and the sun is, of course, your ruler, and the sun is conjunct Venus and it's conjunct Mars. I talked a lot about sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint. I don't really want to talk about the sun on the Venus-Mars midpoint, anymore, because I talked about it so much. But in a general sense, having the sun conjunct Venus, conjunct Mars, that does make you potentially, attractive, and you can get people's attention without having to do very much, and people can form an opinion about you. And if you make an effort to look good and to say nice things, I think that can certainly boost your popularity. But the sun making the conjunction to Venus and Mars, well, that Sun-Venus conjunction, I think it's exact tomorrow. I mean, it's pretty exact today. So with Sun-Venus conjunction, do, if you can, try to be caring. Caring. I don't know, caring is a word that's sort of overused, but try to understand what other people are experiencing and what other people want, and also what other people might be hiding, because the Sun-Venus conjunction can be difficult, and it's possible that the Sun can be the villain in this Sun-Venus conjunction, because there's Venus trying to be heard, and then the Sun comes along and just blots it out, and you don't want to be the Sun. Okay, you are the Sun. You can't help yourself being the Sun, but you have to think about what impact you are having on others. And it could be that you're not giving people enough support. People need support. People need to be listened to. You want to be listened to. And it might at times feel today that no one is listening to you. But it sort of works both ways as well. Maybe if you want to be listened to, you need to listen as well, and try to understand other people's weaknesses, and also understand how you might be interacting with someone else's weaknesses. And as I just said, the Sun could be the villain in this Sun-Venus conjunction. I've talked about in previous videos what it means to have a Sun-Venus conjunction in your chart. And I think having a Sun-Venus conjunction in your chart does to an extent depend on gender. I mean, if, for example, a woman with a Sun-Venus conjunction, her Venus might be put under pressure by the Sun. The Sun can be a male force, perhaps a partner or someone else, or a male relative who is pressurizing her, who is sort of blotting her out. But then a man with a Sun-Venus conjunction, that can say something about how he treats women, and how he responds to them. So a man with a Sun-Venus conjunction, it's quite possible that he might not always treat women well. I mean, these are generalizations, and everyone has to deal with the Sun. If they have a Sun-Venus conjunction, they have to deal with it in their own way. And I don't want to say if you happen to have a Sun-Venus conjunction in your chart, that it's necessarily going to work in any particular way. And there are other things you have to consider. You have to think about what sign the Sun-Venus conjunction is in, whether the Sun-Venus conjunction is applying or whether it's separating. And the Sun is also making a conjunction to Mars. So this Sun-Mars conjunction is getting close. It's less than a degree away, and it's been brewing for some time. And as I said right at the beginning of this video, the Sun-Mars conjunction can be quite fiery. It can be explosive. It can be dangerous. And with this Sun-Mars conjunction, you don't want to push things too far. You want to take it easy, and you want to really think about your own health and well-being. You might want to do something in a hurry, feeling it's the right thing to do. You do it, and you might lose control, and you might have maybe an accident on your hands. I mean, we don't want an accident. I'm sure an accident won't happen. But there is something rather accident-prone about the Sun-Mars conjunction. And I think, Leo, that's something that you need to think about over the next few days. But there is a positive side to Sun-Mars conjunction. Mars is in Capricorn, it's exalted in Capricorn, and it's very dynamic. So with the Sun-Mars conjunction, there may be things that you can make them happen through your effort. You keep pushing in a particular direction, and you make sure that everything is done properly. And then you might see that the Sun-Mars conjunction could actually work in your favor. But I'll be talking more about the Sun-Mars conjunction because it hasn't gone away, and it's still getting stronger. So yeah, I'll be talking more about that over the next few days. Virgo. You may get the impression, if you've been listening to some of my other readings for the 12 signs, that it is a bit strained. It's strained, and it just might be that not a huge amount is happening, on a personal level. Maybe, I mean, you can see the potential. You can see all these things that could happen, both in a good and a bad sense, but are they actually happening right now? And the answer, may be no, especially if you take a cautious approach. And I think it's quite possible that you take a cautious approach at the moment. You don't want to draw too much attention to yourself, and instead you would like to take things quietly and easily. And there are things, Virgo, that you probably want to keep to yourself. And even if you did want to talk about them, where would the opportunity be? Because there just may be no pathways, no obvious way to communicate in a spontaneous way about what you're thinking and feeling. And it's important not to push it. If that's the way you feel, then that is the way you feel, and that's just the way it is. Now, on a more positive note, don't forget there are still 4 planets in Capricorn, and we're going to have 4 planets in Capricorn for the next week or two. And so Capricorn is an earth sign. It's a sign that has a natural sympathy with you. And with those 4 planets in Capricorn, that might say something about what you can do in a constructive way. I think you can be constructive, and you can do something which, not just one thing, maybe several things, which really show originality, but grounded originality. And that's maybe what you should be thinking about. You do something new, but you also make sure that it has some staying power, that it can actually last, that it can persist. And that may be the advantage of all these planets in Capricorn. You know your priorities, and you're not interested in anything that is fake. Sure, you can create dramatic effects if you want, but that dramatic effects are just they're not going to last. They'll fade in minutes. So why bother doing things for show? And instead, you want to be quite fundamental about things. Yeah, the fundamentals really do matter, and so your approach to anything should be serious, whether it's your approach to your own creativity, whether it's your approach to having fun, or your approach to other people, how you deal with other people. There is an underlying seriousness, because you're not interested in temporary effects. The time for temporary effects is over, and it is, of course, the Capricorn season, and if you look at the chart right now, there's just a lot of stuff in Earth with those 4 planets in Capricorn. and there are no planets in fire sign. Well, okay, that's not true. Of course, we've got the moon. The moon is in Leo, so the moon is in a fire sign, and Pluto is in Aquarius. So those are the only two planets which are in positive elements. Earth and air. Fire and air are the positive elements. So that those two planets have a huge amount of work. I mean, Pluto's just not going to cut it because it's just this transpersonal planet which it really works on a mainly collective level. I mean, Moon in Leo is trying hard, but it's not going to really get very far. So, that goes back to what I was saying about temporary effects. Yeah, you might be able to create some temporary effects, do something that looks good for a few seconds, but that doesn't matter. And, instead, you're looking for something which can be foundational. And maybe that's the best way of using these Capricorn planets, over the next week or two, just really being serious about the fun things in life, being serious about your own creativity. And I think that, with that approach, I think that Virgo, you're going to be able to create something of lasting value. Libra. Ideally, you want to be in control, and you are looking for some kind of structure. And the reason for this is the fact that we have got a quintile between Venus and Saturn. Venus is your ruler, and this quintile represents the kind of effects that you are trying to create. And as far as you're concerned, restraint does matter, and you don't want to give away too much. And so, Libra, you might be making a deliberate effort to bring about some self-control, regardless of what else is going on around you, what you're being presented with. You want to just give the impression maybe that you're ever so slightly disinterested. Because if you do get interested in things, if you are in the center of things, well, things can happen. And it's not always going to be desirable. So if you do want to take that approach, I think that's probably absolutely correct. It's in terms of what you say, what you do, how you dress, where you go to. Maybe you want to make a special effort to avoid particular places or particular people that are overtaxing, or maybe that ask too many questions, because there are things that you do want to keep to yourself. And so I think that is probably the best approach. I mean, there may well be social temptations. I mean, with the moon in Leo, you might feel that it might be a good idea to, reach out, talk to people, meet people, but I don't think it's going to work. Moon might be in Leo, but it's not going anywhere. The moon is void. I mean, it's making a square to Uranus in the end, but that doesn't take away from the fact it's void, using my definition of a void of course moon. My definition of a void of course moon is when the moon has made its last major aspect to a traditional planet. And the moon has certainly done that. Okay, the moon might be making a trine to Chiron, but that's pretty minor. And very good reasons why you might want to adopt a cautious approach. I mean, Venus is combust. It's also conjunct Mars, and so you are very aware of things that could go wrong. You're also very aware of who your friends and enemies are and who could undermine you. Certain people can be undermining. They can almost sort of blot you out, perhaps with the power of their personality or their egos, and that's obviously not something you want. So it's important, Libra, that you trust your own judgment, and if you feel that something is unsafe, then fair enough. If you feel that certain people and situations are not going to be good for you, then I would suggest that you do trust your own judgment. On the other hand, you don't want to find yourself to be cornered. You could decide that you want to retreat and you just want to be in one place, but it just could get sort of all too much. It could all be overwhelming. So you don't want too much single pointedness today. I mean, even though that might be your natural inclination, you need a little bit of variety. Perhaps going from one place to another, going from one trusted place to another trusted place, not staying with one person for too long, just making sure that things don't get too intense. Because I don't think, Libra, that intensity is anything you want. On the other hand, Libra, you are capable of looking after yourself. I mean, Venus is making a conjunction to the Sun, it's making a conjunction to Mars, so it's possible that you're able to take the energy of Sun and Mars and actually use that energy. It might not be anything you want to do, but if you are prepared to raise your voice, are prepared to assert yourself, probably not something you want to do, but if you are able to do that, then you will see that there are effects. I mean, not just today, but tomorrow, day after, as that conjunction between the Sun and Venus and the Sun and Mars comes exact, the Sun and Venus and Venus and Mars comes exact. I mean, I think that's what you might experience. And yeah, Venus conjunct Mars. There is Venus conjunct Mars. Mars can represent another person, and maybe you're aware that another person is on the horizon. You can see over the next couple of days that you might have to spend a lot of time with another person, or someone might be demanding your attention. And it's perhaps a case of, at what stage can you stop an asteroid, no, not an asteroid, a meteorite or a comet hitting the Earth? The sooner you act, the better. So if you see that you're on a collision course with another person, then there may be something you can do to shift this other person off their orbit or off their particular path. And so in some situations, it might be a time for evasive action. You can see perhaps a difficult situation coming up, a situation that you want nothing to do with coming up over the next couple of days, and you can just change your schedule, make sure you're not available, make sure you're somewhere else. So if there's anything you want to avoid, Libra, then maybe that's what today could be about. Just changing things and just making sure that you stay out of trouble and make sure that you stay out of another person's warpath. It could be a warpath. I mean, Venus making a conjunction to Mars. Some people do need to be avoided. Scorpio. Now, Scorpio, there is a lot of emphasis on your ruler, which is of course Mars. Mars in Capricorn, and for sure you're strongly placed, and you have a huge amount of power. But sometimes you can use that power in the wrong way. It can get misdirected, especially when you've got the Sun right on Mars. There is a Sun-Mars conjunction. So we might then say that Mars is combust, that Mars is in some way burnt up by the Sun. Although combust Mars, it's not something people talk about so much. People talk about combust Mercury, people talk about combust Venus. Maybe combust Mars works in a slightly different way. I mean, when you've got the Sun conjunct Mars, that does perhaps provide a boost. It provides more energy, but the question is, do you want that energy? And is there a possibility that it just might become, just too intense? So, Scorpio, I think it's important that you don't force things and that you don't allow things to get out of control, because they could get out of control. And if you do something that's dangerous or is perhaps socially dangerous, then things could happen very quickly, and you might find that you've just used too much force So if there's something you're trying to do, something you're trying to achieve, then probably it's best to use as little energy as possible. Better to use too little than too much. As they say, you can always take more, but you can never take less. And so don't push it, and also don't say more than you have to. It can be tempting to say what's on your mind, but sometimes the wrong words can cause a lot of damage. Though one thing that you do seem to be quite comfortable with is the concepts of power and rules and government and the extent of government power. And so if you are talking about issues relating to authority and what is possible and what is not possible in a legal sense, then Scorpio, you can be quite effective. And if there's something you want to know about in a legal sense, then I think you're going to be very good at getting to grips with the issue. So I'm sure you probably don't want to spend your day reading law books or reading about the laws of the land. You might not want to, but if you were to do that, or if you were to feel that it was necessary, then I think that you would give yourself a very good picture of what is going on. And in general, Scorpio, it is a great time for research, for finding things out. You know where the information lies, almost sort of instinctively. And that could be a good way of using today. It's the first day of the week. It's Christmas and New Year are over. You want to start things on a solid footing. You are ambitious to an extent, and you then want to make sure that you've got everything sorted out. So that might be a very good way of using the day's energies, and of course not getting too angry about anything, because you could, because of the Sun making a conjunction to Mars. Additionally, Venus is getting quite close to Mars, and the Venus-Mars conjunction is potentially about relationships. That can't be avoided, and at least that interpretation can't be avoided. And so with Venus conjunct Mars, it may be that at the moment you're trying to negotiate something with another person. Perhaps you're trying to get closer to another person, or you're trying to come to an agreement with someone, but there could be just something in the way, and it could be annoying. And the question is, what do you do, and how do you get past this hurdle, this sort of communication barrier? And I think the answer is you wait. There is always the right time for doing something and a wrong time. And so if communication is blocked off, then maybe it's just a question of waiting. That Venus-Mars conjunction will come about, and when that Venus-Mars conjunction becomes exact, that might be the time for really being able to communicate. And you have to be aware with this Venus-Mars conjunction, about what is going on, who is in the stronger position. You are Mars, you are exalted in Capricorn. So when dealing with other people, certainly in a one-to-one situation, be aware of your strengths, but also be aware how you could be quite overwhelming. There is something about you that is strong, and you know how to look after your own best interests, but sometimes you can just take things too far. And so, do make sure, if that's what you want, that you give people space, that you give people a chance to express themselves, because, sometimes you can just be just a bit too much. Sagittarius. The moon is making a trine to Chiron, and this moon trine Chiron might well be relevant to you. The moon is in Leo, Chiron is in Aries, so you're a Sagittarius, so the fire signs are kind of represented. And with this moon trine Chiron, it gives you the opportunity perhaps to explore and to do things which are an essential part of your identity. You don't have to show off about it. In fact, the less you show off, the better. It's not a day for showing off. I mean, if you were to show off, I think that it could really backfire. And so perhaps Sagittarius, in your own private way, with the Sun making a trine to Chiron, you have a chance to be yourself and to do something that is of unique value, which might also be disruptive in the end. But right now, today, you probably don't want to be disruptive, because I don't think it would be appreciated. And if you try to start something very definite, if you try to take an initiative, then you make some progress. Yeah, the moon is making a trine to Chiron, but there are just limits to it. And perhaps you should be satisfied with your own insights. If you have insights, if you make progress, but if it's not recognized, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about recognition. It's about just you slowly getting to grips with things and not feeling that there's any great rush. It is the beginning of a week. And, additionally, Sagittarius, you have to think about, what you can perhaps afford. There are 4 planets in Capricorn right now over the next week or two. Those planets will stay in Capricorn. And Capricorn is a very practical sign. It's a sign where you do have to think about what you have and what you don't have. And the Sun is about to make a conjunction to Mars, and the Sun, and also making a conjunction to Venus. And with those 2 conjunctions, there could be things financially that do irritate you, but are starting to irritate you. Maybe you hadn't thought about it, but now that 2026 has really started in earnest, Sagittarius, you're perhaps aware that, well, actually something has to happen. Again, not necessarily today, but perhaps over the week you need to kind of get something together. Capricorn, just enjoy your strength and your power without showing off, without having to make any grand exhibitions. It's just not necessary. You are yourself, and you have what you need, and you really you don't have to show off, and people do recognize you, even if it doesn't feel like it. So you might kind of underestimate yourself and underestimate the impact you're having. And so if you underestimate yourself, then there's a danger that you might overdo it. You might not feel that you've made your point clear, but you have made your point clear, and people absolutely understand. And as far as today is concerned, the moon is moving through Leo. Moon in Leo, it does say a lot about today, even though you're a Capricorn, and Leo and Capricorn are 2 signs that tend not to have much to do with one another. But with the moon in Leo, that's really saying something about the approach you should have, and the approach you should have is maybe sort of wait and see. It's not a time to be taking huge initiatives, because you don't know enough, and at the same time, if you were to take initiatives today, I just don't think it would work. You would perhaps not be understood or not appreciated, or maybe just other people are focusing on something else. So just accept the situation. You accept your own power. Of all the 12 signs with 4 planets in Capricorn, you are in some respects the most powerful. But it's not a day for showing off that power, and instead it's a time to be reflecting and also planning. And as far as other people are concerned, while it's true that I don't think today is especially sociable, if you make the effort, and I mean make the effort, I mean do things in a very planned and organized way. If you make the effort, it is possible that you can attract people's attention, but it's not, there's nothing very spontaneous about it. You perhaps you analyze certain people, you ask yourself, what kind of people are they, and what do you need to do, and you perhaps have an awareness of people's weaknesses as well as their strengths, and because of all that, you can plan what you can do. You plan what you do. You plan the impressions you are giving. So there's a lot of impression management here, and so you can draw people your way. You can get their support. Again, if that's what you want. I mean, left to yourself, if you don't do any planning, you're going to be largely on your own, and maybe you're happy that way. But if you really feel that it is necessary to bring people into your orbit, you can do it. But it just needs a lot of work, a lot of planning. You might take the view that it's just not worth the effort. But if you feel it is important over the course of the day to get someone's attention, then the right level of organization and insight, thinking about who you're dealing with, another person's strengths and weaknesses, and then you can create a coherent strategy. And you shouldn't, one shouldn't really think that relationships are about strategy and working it all out, but today they might well be. Aquarius. The moon continues moving through Leo, and I'm not sure if there's much more to be said. I mean, moon in Leo, it doesn't do anything in Leo. It just highlights your opposite sign. And so with moon in Leo, you kind of feel that certain people can't be ignored. You're aware that it's not all about you, and if need be, you can show some consideration. You understand that you can't do everything on your own, that you do need to take into account other people's feelings, but it's all very sort of low key. There's nothing necessarily that has to be done. There's a potential for things to happen, but I'm not convinced that potential will ever be realized. Yet there is a quintile between Venus and Saturn. Venus-Saturn quintile, it's quite an understated aspect, but Venus is a planet of relationships. It's making a quintile to Saturn, and so with that aspect, if you're prepared to motivate yourself and make the effort, then you can get people's attention. It's not entirely easy, but there are always ways, and so you shouldn't feel that other people are entirely a law unto themselves. And perhaps with the moon in Leo, you have the ability to take into account what other people are going through. It does give you a certain amount of empathy, moon in Leo. And so because of that, you're able to sort of bring that information in and work out a way of getting people to notice you, and also in the end to maybe fit in with your particular views or your way of working. So there's always a way, and if you start the day thinking that certain people are being uncooperative, then don't underestimate your own power. Your power is perhaps quite hidden. You're not revealing it, but it is very real, and there may be times during the day when you can intervene. Everything's quiet, and there's just a sudden gap, a space, and an opportunity for you to do something that is quite unexpected, but you do it, and it makes an impression. People notice you, and they take you more seriously. So you do have a certain sense of the dramatic at particular critical times, but it is important, Aquarius, that you do get your timing right. Pisces. Neptune is still in Pisces. I'm just reminding you, and it's in very late Pisces, and it's getting ready to go into Aries, and it's getting rather close to Skeet. So Neptune is now 10 arc minutes from Skeet, and Skeet is is a star that is, often connected with disasters and things going wrong, and maybe you're feeling it more than usual. This capacity to be aware of disasters, and maybe this is something about the compassionate side to Pisces. I mean, you are the ocean, and because you are the ocean, you can feel everything, and you can perhaps feel other people's pain, and you can feel the impact of disasters. And there are always disasters going on around us, and there are always disturbances. And so, yeah, I think the Skeet energy is getting close, and it's not because I'm saying Neptune is the ruler of Pisces, because it's not. Jupiter rules Pisces, but Neptune has an association with Pisces, and because Neptune is in Pisces, moving towards a conjunction of Skeet, over the next few weeks, I think that it's something that you're very aware of in the run up to Neptune, of course, in the end, moving into Aries. But you don't want to be completely overwhelmed by it all. And I think part of your efforts today should be focused on making sure that everything is just done properly. That there is a place for order. I mean, the problem with order is that order can just brush over the reality, the chaotic reality. But a certain level of order might be important, and that might be something that you want to address yourself to. Not necessarily with any aims, just moving this, moving that. If you see a complication, dealing with the complication. But it all happens in a way that is very unplanned, and then slowly but surely you can start to make progress, and things in the end will be in better shape. And as far as other people are concerned, you don't spend too much time worrying about other people and what other people are doing. They're not particularly important, certainly on a one-to-one level. I mean, you might feel that you should be spending time with another person, but I don't think you do. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, you want to keep things simple, and what you don't want is unexpected meetings, unexpected pressures. You suddenly being asked to do something you don't want to do. You don't want that, and so you always want to make sure that you've got an opportunity to change things, that you're not tied to any one particular course of action. So it's probably a bad day for agreeing to things or making appointments. Why tie yourself up unnecessarily? When you want to have the freedom to create your own order, because order does matter, as I've already said, and it may be to an extent that people and order are at odds with one another. Where there are lots of people, there's chaos. Where there's no one, there's order. Though, with 4 planets in Capricorn, 4 planets still in Capricorn, it just may be that there are certain people who are difficult to avoid, not necessarily people who are super important to you, but maybe friends or other people you just have to meet. There's no way around it. And, they do potentially take up a lot of time. We have got a Venus-Mars conjunction coming up in a few days' time. We've got a Sun-Mars conjunction. And so it's, and we've got a Sun-Venus conjunction. So yeah, it's kind of all happening on a social perspective. It is happening. But the question is how much you want to get involved in it. And over the next few days, I think it might be very important that you just maintain your boundaries. You've got to give people something, but you certainly don't want to give people too much. And now I want to switch from the astrology to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 26, which is the taming power of the great. So the taming power of the great represents a large force, something that is powerful, but it needs to be tamed. We don't want it to get out of control. And if we relate this back to the astrology, we've got a Sun, Venus, Mars conjunction coming up over the next few days, and maybe this is the force that needs to be tamed. But even if it isn't, there's just something that we need to take charge of, and we just don't want it to get out of control. And it might be that circumstances intervene. So the second line moves, and one of the symbol of the second line is of a carriage sort of getting unstuck. I think getting stuck. Actually, one of the perhaps its wheels get broken, or its sort of undercarriage hits the ground and it can't move any further, or perhaps a wheel falls off, and that might be a good thing. We were planning on moving in a particular direction. We were all ready, and then things come to a halt. And one reason things might come to a halt is perhaps because of the social environment. That second line moving in the taming power of the great means that two things are at odds with one another. It may be we find that we are at odds with another person, and because we're at odds with another person, progress has to stop. Or it's a situation that we're in, something we thought we were going to get involved with. Everything was in order, but now we see the reality of the situation. So taming power of the great just could be about, just to begin with, stopping before we've even started, and that might be the end of it. Then the third line moves. So third line is usually in the I Ching quite a difficult line, but in this case not necessarily so bad. And it could be about us wanting to make progress, and feeling that perhaps we have to make progress, but getting help. And the imagery of the third line moving relates to a horse. So a horse can move us forward. So maybe there's another body, another person, maybe another animal, the horse. I don't ride. I'm allergic to horses, at least last time I got close to horses. Yeah, God, I was 6. Someone put me on a donkey for about 5 seconds and I immediately got an asthma attack. Anyway, I don't have anything against donkeys, but me and horses, I don't really have any association with horses. But as far as this is concerned, this means that something, maybe it is a horse, so you have the idea of someone trying to get out of trouble by being on a horse, and the horse just knows where to go. So talking about the taming power of the great, this may be about some great force getting us out of trouble. And then the fifth line moves. So the fifth line is about a powerful, dangerous force that we might have to deal with, but it can be tamed. It can be brought under control. And what you have to think about is not bringing something under control through direct conflict, but instead changing something's nature, changing its priorities. Maybe you're dealing with someone who is, the reason they're difficult is because they're obsessed about something, or they regard something as being very important, but you need to kind of get them to look in a different way. change their approach and realize, well, why is that? Why are you so worried about this? Why don't you worry about something else? And so perhaps, by doing that, one can get through the problem. And is there a problem? I mean, just the taming power of a great. We have got three moving lines here, and so with three moving lines, that does indicate that there is quite a lot happening. Normally one would expect, say, one moving line. Three moving lines is a bit excessive. So there's a lot to cope with, a lot to manage. But, I think that it's all worth doing, because there is a reward at the end, because the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 42, which is increase. And increase just means we get more. There is an advance and increase. Maybe we increase our power, our knowledge, our self-worth. Could be financial, but it's a struggle with the taming power of a great. That in the end we get our rewards. Might not seem obvious at the time, but by the end of the day we are a better person than we were at the beginning of the day. And finally, I want to go back to the astrology, and it's all a bit chaotic here, because I feel I do have to say something about Venezuela. I made a video but I actually put the video up on Friday relating to the full moon, and I did mention Venezuela on the video I put up on Friday, and the reason I mentioned Venezuela, was relating to Venezuela's horoscope. So here is let's look at Venezuela's horoscope. This is the 1811 horoscope for Venezuela. So here it is. This is one chart used for Venezuela's independence. It does have a time. I don't know to what extent one can rely on that time. But the thing is about Venezuela's chart is it has its sun at 12 degrees 47 Cancer. So there is a link here between Venezuela and the United States, because Venezuela was born on July the 5th and 1811, and so that means that let's get this right, 24, 30, 24, let me get my 24, that's 30, so 35 years earlier the United States was born. So they were born sort of 35 years apart. The United States was, of course, July the 4th, 1776. So what hits one inevitably hits the other. And so the full moon that we had, so here was a full moon that took place on January the 3rd, just after the what do they call it? Operation Absolute Resolve, where the Americans went in on over the weekend and they basically kidnapped the president and Nicolas Maduro and took him back to the US, supposedly to stand trial. We do not know what the circumstances are. Why there was no resistance, whether it had been sort of organized beforehand, whether they'd done a deal with someone, maybe even I heard it suggested maybe they did a deal with Maduro himself. I don't know. But this full moon on January the 3rd, just after Operation Absolute Resolve, was at 13 degrees 2 Cancer. And this is a reminder that when you've got a full moon, you can have it can signal events before it happened. So the full moon was on January, was at 5:03 a.m. and this Operation Absolute Resolve was 3 hours earlier. And clearly this full moon has had a big impact, obviously, on Venezuela, but we don't quite know what kind of impact it is having, because it's not like the government has fallen. Maduro's vice president has taken over. I'll be looking at her chart in a moment. And we so far, I mean, at least from the news I saw just before I made this video, we're not dealing with any kind of revolution or anything like that, in spite of Trump saying he's going to he's kind of running Venezuela at the moment. But, is that really the case? So as far as the operation is concerned, the general consensus seems to be that the operation went very well. I mean, very well because no Americans were killed. In fact, quite a lot of Venezuelans were killed. But certainly as far as the US media is concerned, well, it's the American lives that matter, isn't it? So here, I think, was it 40, 50 Venezuelans killed? But, I mean, it seems that those lost lives don't seem to matter much. So as far as the absolute resolve is concerned, I believe it was at 2:01 a.m. on Saturday morning. So here is a chart set for Caracas, and it was just before the full moon. So there was a moon at 10 degrees Cancer, moving towards an opposition with Sun, Venus, and Mars. So the question is, astrologically, was that a good time to launch this operation? It's tempting to look at this chart and say there's a conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. The moon is in Cancer, Jupiter's exaltation. Jupiter's in Cancer, a sign ruled by the moon. So moon making a conjunction to Jupiter, that's a great aspect to have such an operation on. That success is perhaps, is it guaranteed? I don't know. But then the moon does have to get through an opposition to the Sun and an opposition to Venus. And so we know for sure that the mission was a success if you judge it by the mission was kidnapping Maduro, taking him back to America, plus no Americans being killed. So in that sense, it was a success. But the question is, does that opposition between the moon and Sun, Venus, Mars, does that represent the future? Is that how the project will eventually end? Is it going to have a good ending? It is difficult to say. I mean, do we focus on the fact that the moon is eventually going to make that conjunction to Jupiter? Moon, Jupiter in Cancer. Of course, the US is a Cancerian country. Of course, so is Venezuela, a Cancerian country. Both got their suns at 13 degrees Cancer. So that seems to be kind of relevant, that this Sun-Jupiter conjunction, particularly that moon in Cancer, is really bringing these two countries together. And of course, it's this Cancerian full moon, and the moon is going to make an opposition to Venus, Sun, and Mars symbolically. And so that may say something about the kind of maybe mess that the United States has got itself into with Venezuela. How is it going to finish? What happens next? And someone who is going to be perhaps in the firing line is the new acting president. So the acting president is Delcy Rodriguez. So I don't have a time of birth for a time of birth. I have a date of birth for Delcy Rodriguez. So Delcy Rodriguez, apparently she's a lawyer, and she has been involved with left-wing politics for a long time. Her father was involved with left-wing politics. Her father was arrested, by the right-wing regime in Venezuela. I would guess in the 70s. In the 70s was really bad in South America. You had some horrific governments in South America. You had the coup in Chile, which was, of course, supported by the CIA, and you had people disappearing, getting thrown off helicopters, and it was throughout South America. And Venezuela was no exception. So her father was arrested. Her father died in police custody or in prison. I don't quite know the details. And you could argue that this is reflected in her chart. She has the Sun at 27 Taurus opposition Neptune. That does perhaps give us the idea of a father who has disappeared, he's taken away, he dies because of the actions of the authorities. Maybe Maduro, for her, the president is kind of like that. Maybe he was a father figure. I don't know. I have no idea what the relationship between Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez is, but the sun could symbolize a president, a male president who disappears. Yeah, the Americans kidnap him and they take him to America. Now she's left in control. That Sun-Neptune opposition. And that Sun-Neptune opposition is being triggered by Uranus. Uranus is about to go stationary at 27 Taurus. So she's got Uranus conjunct her Sun. She's got Uranus opposition her Neptune. That certainly says something about her experience, right now. And that may say something about what's going to be happening, over the next month, because it's unlikely that things are going to stay the same in Venezuela. She is acting president, but she's certainly got her work cut out for her. I mean, I don't find her horoscope particularly exciting, particularly interesting. It's always difficult to be interested in a horoscope that doesn't have a time of birth. But she is a Taurus, and she may be is going to want to hang on. She's going to be perhaps quite persistent, but we'll have to see. I mean, it's just difficult to know. But I think that Delcy Rodriguez's Sun-Neptune opposition is very interesting and very important, given the fact that it's been hit by Uranus, and she's perhaps got this repeated trauma. Losing her father and then losing her president. So this did all happen with the full moon, and this full moon was opposition Mars. And when we think about Mars, we think about Trump's inauguration chart. I mean, it was quite obvious when we saw Trump's inauguration chart, when he became president, just over a year, just under a year ago. Is that right? Yeah, just under a year ago. That Mars was exactly on the IC, right there, on the IC. And so that seemed to me to indicate a regime, an administration that would be fighting wars. It was a very combative IC. I certainly said so at the time. I'm guessing that any other astrologer that looked at that inauguration chart would have come to the same conclusion. This is not exactly difficult astrology. It's very obvious having that Mars on the IC. And I thought perhaps that Mars on the IC might represent his own internal struggles, perhaps his domestic struggles, and there have been a lot of them as well, but just having Mars angular. And he talked about an end to wars, finally America getting out of the grips of the neocons, but the neocons are back in control because maybe that Mars on the IC is just really making itself felt. So that's that's pretty easy symbolism. And then there's Trump himself. So as far as Trump himself is concerned, maybe we just should keep it simple. I mean, we should keep it simple and say, well, Trump has Mars rising, and so someone with Mars rising is going to be looking for a fight in the end. I mean, maybe in his first administration, not so much, but now it's really coming into its own. Which raises a question about what exactly is or was going on in Trump's chart at the time of this absolute, what would they call it, operation sort of absolute resolve. Saturn is interesting. Saturn is at 26. What is Saturn? Is at 26:16 Pisces. So Saturn is moving towards a quincunx of Trump's Mars. And, we sometimes neglect the quincunx aspects. And so Mars represents Trump, the man who wants to assert himself, wants to assert his authority. Saturn may indicate that things may not be quite as easy as he'd imagined. And he's done very well. He's had his victory in Venezuela, but Saturn is going to make that quincunx to Mars, and so that may mean that things aren't entirely easy. And also Uranus is about to station, and Uranus will station pretty close to the square of his Mars. So Trump has to be careful about pushing things too far. Maybe he doesn't have quite as much power as he thinks he has. On the other hand, Neptune is moving into Aries. And, I've been thinking about Neptune in Aries. And Neptune in Aries, I think, is a really important change. Neptune on the Aries. Neptune is on the Aries point. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. We haven't experienced Neptune going into Aries since the 1860s. I think in 1862 Neptune went into Aries. And so, with Neptune moving through Pisces, perhaps people were all over the place. People were thinking, were being sort of quite sacrificial. People were thinking about dealing with things maybe on a sort of a more collective level, globalism. That perhaps is a Neptune and Pisces thing. Concerns about making sure everyone's all right, and putting other people first, always other people first, having a lot of compassion. But Neptune's about to move into Aries, and that really does suggest to me that what people are going to be looking for in Neptune in Aries is leadership. I mean, that's what people are going to want. In the 1860s, early 1860s, and then Neptune went into Aries, I think people were looking for leadership. Neptune Aries went into Aries around the time of the Civil War, just before the Civil War. So here's a chart, by the way, of Neptune moving into Aries on February the 14th, 1862. So, sorry, did I say just before the Civil War? I meant just during the Civil War. My apologies. So Neptune went into Aries at the time of the Civil War, when people were looking for leadership. Neptune went into Aries probably around the time that the Union was starting to overwhelm the Confederacy. At the beginning of the war, it was really touch and go about who was going to win. But Neptune Aries, they wanted leadership. They had Abraham Lincoln, and you had the generals. And if you look at Germany, this was a time when Bismarck, the ascendancy of Bismarck, when Bismarck became Chancellor of Germany, united Germany. That's what people are looking for. They're not looking anymore for anything globalist, the international rules-based order. I think that this might be what Neptune moving into Aries is partly about. People want strong governments, they want strong leaders. And you could argue, but in terms of Neptune in Aries, that Donald Trump, to an extent, is symbolic of that, but I don't think Donald Trump is necessarily quite as strong as he comes out over as being. I mean, he'd like to come over as being strong, but I think that he is influenced by other people to a great extent, and he is to a great extent influenced by the last person he talked to. So there's always that thing with Trump. So maybe one needs to be thinking about Trump's successor, and I'm starting to think Neptune in Aries, a lot will rest quite possibly on J.D. Vance. But going back to the American chart, I mean, Neptune in Aries, reminding ourselves of the USA chart, this is happening. This Venezuela adventure is happening just as Saturn and Neptune are about to move into Aries. And we should not forget that the United States has its IC at 1 degree 3 minutes Aries. So that means that Neptune is really hitting at the foundations of what America is all about. Yeah, people are looking for leadership, and I think people will be looking for leadership. But with Saturn and Neptune on the IC, there's a real uncertainty in America coming along. And another thing about this full moon, which I didn't mention, I mentioned the fact that this full moon was hitting the United States' sun. That's true. So the United States has its sun as 1319 Cancer. So this full moon that we just had, the moon was conjunct the United States' sun. The sun was opposition the United States' sun. Plus Mars was tied up with that full moon. So it was a very Mars full moon. And let's not forget the inauguration chart. Trump's inauguration chart had Mars on the IC. But it was also impacting Saturn. And so the full moon was impacting America's Sun square Saturn, Sun in Cancer square Saturn in Libra. Now, the United States has a very strong Saturn in Libra. I mean, in a way, I believe that exalted Saturn in the 10th house perhaps explains how America has been so successful as a country. Whatever you say about it, there's been a continuous uninterrupted government since the revolution. You haven't had any coups, you haven't had communism, you haven't had fascism, you've had the rule of law. Sometimes it's frays, but it's kind of still there. So this full moon really does bring out that Sun square Saturn in the United States' chart. And of course, Venezuela, who has its sun at 13 degrees Cancer, United States' Saturn is squaring Venezuela's sun. So the impact of Venezuela of the United States on Venezuela has always been strong, and you can see how strong it is right now. But this full moon, it's certainly important. It's not going away. Certainly for the next month, we would expect to see that full moon, manifest in many different ways. It's a very Mars event, and it reminds us of the fact that Trump became president when Mars was on the IC, and now we've got Neptune to be worried about. And Neptune is on Skeet, the fixed star associated with disasters, particularly shipping disasters, but disasters in general. And when Neptune is moving into Aries, it hasn't been in Aries since it went into Aries in 1862, in the middle of the Civil War. And so there's a lot to talk about here. And I'm sorry about it. I'm a bit all over the place in my video today, but I did want to mention Venezuela again, because it is unfolding quickly, and definitely we are living in unstable times, and I think that full moon really sums it up. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.